This video is a reading from Peter Ouspensky's book, Talks with the Devil. I've had this for a long time, and this story is now applicable because of what's happening in the Middle East. And Peter Ouspensky was a teacher of how to be a conscious being, a fourth way school practitioner, pioneer, student of GURDJIEFF, and he wrote practical textbooks on fourth way schools, and he also writes a few of these stories. And the reason for a story rather than a textbook is to get the information to you for those who are emotionally centered. So this thing's quite long. I might have to break it into two parts. I've been wanting to do this for years. The form of my school, for those who follow me, is the bedtime story. So this is another bedtime story. So just let it wash over you, and we'll see what happens. Just to give you the setting, this happens in India, at the famous caves at Ellora, which you can look up on YouTube and see the video. These are hand carved out of solid rock. And like all of these strange monuments, it looks like it must have had to have been done with alien tools. You know, that it could never have been done by hand, but the jury's still out on that. So this is called the Benevolent Devil. It happened when I was traveling in India. One morning I found myself in Ellora, where the famous cave temples are. You have no doubt read or heard about this place. The mountain range runs from Daulatabad and is cut by sharp ridges and deep valleys enclosing the ruins of dead towns. It ends in a sheer rock ledge, horseshoe-shaped and several miles long. Stretching up from the ravine is a concave wall pitted with holes like huge swallows' nests. These are the opening of the cave temples. The whole rock face is pierced with temples penetrating deep into the earth. There are 58 temples here, all belonging to different ancient religions and different gods, each one superseding the last. Inside the huge dark halls, at a height unpenetrated by the light of torches, one can hear the rustling of scores of bats. Here are long corridors, narrow passages, inner courtyards, unexpected balconies and galleries with a view of the plains below. Slippery staircases, polished by bare feet thousands of years ago. Dark wells beyond which one can sense hidden caves. Twilight, silence undisturbed by a single sound. Bas reliefs and statues of many-armed and many-headed gods, most of all the god Shiva, dancing, killing, and merging in convulsive embrace with other figures. Shiva is the god of love and death, with whose strange, cruel, and strongly erotic cult is connected the most idealistic and abstract system of Indian philosophy. Shiva, the dancing god around whom the whole universe dances as his radiant reflection. All contradictions blend in a mysterious way in this god of 1,000 names. Shiva, the benevolent and merciful, the deliverer from misfortune, the divine healer with 1,000 eyes and 1,000 quivers of arrows to vanquish demons. Shiva, protector of the human herd, with the throat blue from a poison intended to annihilate mankind, which he drank himself in order to save the human race. Shiva, the great time, continuous renewer of all he has destroyed. In this sense, he is represented as a lingam, a black phallus existing in the ether, and worshipped as the source of life and god of voluptuousness. Equally, he is Shiva, the god of asceticism and ascetics, himself the great ascetic, clothed in air, the god of wisdom, god of cognition and light. He is also the lord of evil, who lives in cemeteries and crematoria and wears a crown of snakes and a necklace of skulls. Shiva is at once god, priest, and sacrifice, which is the whole universe. The consort of Shiva is as mysterious and contradictory as he. She has many different faces and is known by a variety of names. Parvati, goddess of beauty, love, and happiness. Durga, patroness of mothers and family. And Kali, the Black One, mistress of cemeteries, dancer among ghosts, goddess of evil, disease, murder, and simultaneously goddess of wisdom and revelation. Further along the rock face are temples of Buddha, where men have renounced the world and prayed for deliverance from it. There are places whose huge statues have stood silent and lost in contemplation for 2,000 years. In the center of the long chain of temples is the vast Kailas temple, or temple of the sky. Kailas is a mythical mountain in the Himalayas where the gods live, an Indian Olympus. A huge cavity was hollowed out of the rock for this temple. In the middle of the hollow stand 3 large pagodas decorated with carved stone tracery. Not a single stone is laid upon another. All is hewn out of solid rock. 2 gigantic statues of elephants several times their natural size stand at the sides of the pagodas, also hewn from the stone. Fanning out and boring deep into the rock behind are galleries, underground passages, and dark, mysterious halls, whose rough walls still bear marks of the instruments that chip the granite. Statues and bas-reliefs of terrifying gods stand in the recesses. Once all of this was full of life. There were moving crowds of pilgrims thronging to the festivities on nights of the full moon to watch the sacred dances and to make sacrifices. Hundreds of live dancers flitted about. The scent of jasmine was everywhere. In the inner sanctum, the magic rites of mysterious cults were performed. Some say traces of these rites still survive in India today, though they are carefully concealed from Europeans. All of the caves, down to the very depths, once had a life of their own, a life we cannot even begin to understand. Nowadays, nothing of this is to be seen. The city of temples is a wilderness. There are no Brahmin priests, no dancers, no wandering fakirs, no pilgrims. No more are the endless processions of elephants. Nobody brings flowers. No one lights the fires. As far as the eye can see, there is not a single village or a sign of life across the plains below. Only in 2 or 3 hamlets hidden in the trees live a few watchmen who act as guides. The caves and the temples appear as in a dream. Nowhere in the world does reality blend with the dream world so completely as in these caves. Everyone entering them shares the vague recollection of waking in a dream through dark corridors and there are passages like these. Of climbing, terrified of falling up steep and slippery steps, and bending down and putting a hand out to feel the uneven walls and floor. Of passing through narrow slanting galleries and emerging on the slope of the rock where far down below stretches the misty plain. Perhaps none of this happened, perhaps it did, but the memory of the dark corridors and galleries linger. It was summer, the rainy season. The plains below were covered with a thick green carpet, and everywhere brooks burbled over the rocks to mingle with others further down and obstruct the route to the distant caves. Starting early in the morning, I spent the whole day roaming about the temples with a camera, going down into the caves, climbing over rocks, scrambling up to the top of the slope, and always returning to the temples. All this I did with a kind of eager, avid curiosity, as if I knew, or sensed somehow, that it was here, in this very place, that I would find something I had been searching for. Several times I went right down onto the plains, which were overgrown with vegetation and saturated with water, and tried separate approaches to the most remote and inaccessible part of the temple city. I had been told that there was here, in the third or fourth temple from the end, a certain bas-relief or symbolic wall drawing, and I was determined to find it, and if possible photograph it. My guides diligently searched for a way through, wading waist-deep in the bubbling muddy streams, splashing fearlessly through the wet snake-infested grass, and tearing a path through the dense bushes. But every time we came up against some obstacle, a steep rock face or deep water, it proved impossible to reach the right end of the horseshoe ledge by a shortcut from the plain. It had been raining all day with hardly a lull. Now and again there was a downpour. At such times I took refuge in the nearest temple, lit a cigarette, and waited under a statue of the Buddha with the lowered eyes until the pelting torrents lessened to the familiar steady drizzle. All day long I did not see a single living thing except for my two guides, to whom I spoke in sign language, for they did not know a word of English. The bats in the caves and the occasional gray hair starting from a bush as we approached. In the end, I lost hope of reaching the four temples from below and decided that early next day I would go straight along the top of the slope and try to reach them from above. Toward evening, tired, hungry, and wet, I returned to the guest house. This rest house, or Dauk bungalow, of a kind to be found all over India, was about 2 miles from the caves on a mountain slope in the vicinity of the crumbling tombs of the Muslim conquerors who had ravaged half of India in the 17th century. It was already dark. I was so tired I could not eat. I went straight to bed. Evening parties are not the custom in India, and with the fall of dusk there's nothing left to do but go to bed. The weather got worse. The monsoon was breaking. Sudden gusts of wind shook the whole house, and when the wind dropped I could hear sheets of rain thundering on the roof. I desperately wanted to drop off to sleep quickly and get a good night's rest so that I could make an early start. Tomorrow I simply had to find that temple with the symbolic bas-relief on the wall. But for a long time I lay awake in a kind of heavy stupor, spellbound by the memory of the awe-inspiring temples, feeling that I wandered there still, gazing at the gods and wondering about the underground passages which connected the temples. At the same time, I found myself progressively gripped by a strange agitation. There was something terrifying in the incessant noise of rain and wind, which carried other unexpected sounds with it. The rattle of a train, although the railway was more than 20 miles away, or people's voices and the clatter of hooves on stone. Then tramping, the measured steps of soldiers marching, and the drone of singing, seeming sometimes nearer, sometimes farther away, but never for a moment ceasing. Weariness took its toll upon my nerves. I began to feel that something uncanny and hostile was surrounding me in this dark bungalow. Somebody was watching me. Somebody was stealthily approaching the small house. I knew that I was completely alone in it, that the doors were inadequately locked, and that the watchmen slept in their own hut at the other end of a large clearing. This feeling of unease increased steadily and would not allow me to fall asleep. I began to be irritated with myself, with the monsoon, with India, and with everything around. At the same time, I was becoming more and more gripped by fear, as if I had come to a place of no return, where danger loomed from all sides and something threatened from every corner. I found myself deciding that I would go no further the following day, but travel back to Daulatabad first thing in the morning. It seemed that my consciousness began to fade, and rows of images, pictures, and faces began to file before my eyes. Suddenly something banged violently on the veranda, a room away from me. At once all sleep was gone. The now familiar terror and the dread of some hostile and unpleasant presence gripped me with renewed force. I jumped out of bed, took my revolver out of my suitcase, loaded it, and put it on the table by my bed. For a time it seemed that everything was calming down, and I dozed off. I woke up with a jolt and sat bolt upright. Someone was knocking on my door, not with the usual light tapping, but gripping the handle of the door with both hands, furiously pulling and banging at it. Slowly, as if afraid to reveal that I was awake, I stretched out my hand and fumbled for my revolver. Not until I had found it and aimed it at the door did a singularly calm and sober-minded voice tell me that it was only the wind knocking. Somewhat ashamed of my actions, I put the revolver back and returned to bed. The knocking ceased, but 2 rooms away from me a door banged loudly shut, as if, despairing of making himself heard by me, somebody had gone out onto the veranda and slammed the door. The house for visitors consisted of 4 rooms, 2 of which faced a big veranda. All the rooms were linked by doors. In my room were 4 doors, 2 opening into the adjoining rooms and 2 leading outside. For a while everything was silent except for the pouring rain. Then it came again, the loud banging of a door, and in the next room a window frame rattled as though a fist struck it. After several moments of silence, somebody or something must have crept stealthily up and gripped the handle of my door again, for it suddenly rattled furiously. I could stand it no longer. I leapt out of bed, rushed to the door, and flung it open. Beyond was darkness, and on my left, a room away, a door banged. I returned to my room, lit a candle, and inspected the doors and windows. They were all cracked with the heat of the dry weather and the bolts broken and useless. So long as I walked through the house with the candle, all was quiet. The doors seemed shut tight. But as soon as I returned, lay down, and put out the light, a door in the farthest room banged and the windows rattled. I recalled that I had not found any banging door and began to wonder. My anxiety and alarm increased as I realized that sleep had gone completely and that I would probably have to suffer this torment for the rest of the night. It was so absurd not to be able to fall asleep after such a day. I had not slept the night before because I had had to change trains in the middle of the night. Early in the morning I had arrived in town and dozed off for 2 hours in a guest house like the one I was in. Then, when the horses arrived, I had been jolted about for 3 hours in the wind and rain in a two-wheeled tonga, pulled from hill to hill past fantastic ruins of fortresses and towns, and afterwards I had roamed among the cave from noon till dusk. And now these accursed doors and this unaccountable nameless fear drove away my sleep. Doing without sleep in India is doubly worrying, as the resulting exhaustion is harder to shake off than in other places. A trace of it will remain in the shape of apathy, indifference, irritability, and a complete absence of interest in anything. All this I knew from experience. Now I began to worry that tomorrow I would not want to go anywhere and nothing would interest me, and this realization irritated me still more. Of all the problems of traveling, the most trying is lack of sleep. All the rest are bearable, but when sleep is impossible, one is overcome by a feeling of disintegration, and one's normal self is transformed into a tired, capricious, irritable, and listless creature. This I dreaded most of all. I call this immersion in matter. Everything becomes flat, ordinary, prosaic. The voice of the mysterious and miraculous, which is so strongly heard in India, falls silent and seems no more than a foolish invention. You notice only the discomforts, the ridiculous and unpleasant side of everything and everybody. The mirror loses its luster and the world seems universally gray and flat. This was what tomorrow promised in place of the awesome and unexpected visions which had struck me with such force in the caves the day before. It seemed impossible to get back to sleep. At times the whole bungalow came to life as if it wanted to take off, and all the doors, windows, and shutters clattered simultaneously. Gradually the feeling of terror and fear began to fade, probably from no more than exhaustion. Of course, under cover of this rattling and noise, anyone could have broken in. In the end, though, it was all the same to me. He who wants to, let him come in. I only want to sleep. Then began a painful struggle. I tried every trick I knew to get to sleep. I tried relaxing all my muscles, letting my mind go blank. I listened to my heartbeat and tried to abandon myself to the rhythmic rocking of the waves which were running through my body. With closed eyes, I attempted to penetrate the darkness and mark a central port into which I tried to sink by thinking of nothing. I succeeded in doing it more easily than usual. I did not have any intrusive thoughts, and I went to sleep without difficulty. But as soon as my consciousness began to fade and dreams to appear, somebody started tearing at my door and banging on the veranda again. The noise penetrated my sleep and dragged me back. For a while, during the brief moments of quiet between the paroxysms of rattling, I must have dropped off, only to wake up, concentrate again, and once more sink into sleep. Then I remember wanting to get up one more time to try to fasten the shutters on the veranda. The fear seemed to have gone completely now. I thought how good it would be suddenly to find myself in the caves at night. Again the doors rattled and somebody paced the veranda, but nothing mattered to me anymore. Pictures drifted into my mind. Somebody was speaking right by my ear. Now I saw that I was walking along the edge of the precipice above the temple of Kailas. Pagodas of stone, 3 in a row, stood below. I looked down and then, thrusting slightly with my feet, I left the edge of the rock and began calmly and smoothly to fly over the pagodas. This is far more comfortable, I said to myself, than the roundabout way. I flew past the pagodas and landed on the ground not far from the entrance. I sat on the steps of the first pagoda near the stone elephant with the broken off trunk and waited for somebody. How strange. How could I forget? Of course, I was waiting for the devil. Last time I saw him, we agreed to meet just here in the temple of Kailas. That was why I had come, though I'd forgotten this on my way here. The devil came out from behind the elephant, wrapped in his black cloak, looking as if his presence was nothing out of the ordinary. He sat down on the pedestal of the elephant and leaned against one of the front legs. "Well then, here I am," he said. "Now we can continue our talk." As soon as he had said this, I remembered that he had promised to tell me in detail about devils, about their life and their role in human affairs. How could I have forgotten? Eagerly I prepared to listen. Meetings with the devil and talks with him always showed things in a new and unexpected light, even things I thought I knew all about. "I will repeat what I have said before," said the devil. "You are interested in the nature of the satanic world and our relations with you humans. I told you at the time that you do not understand this and paint a completely false picture of the relationship. People make a great mistake when they think we cause them harm and evil. This is quite untrue. We are very distressed that people do not understand what we do for them. They do not know, indeed they never even imagine, that our whole life consists of constant sacrifice on behalf of the human race, whom we love, whom we serve, and without whom we cannot live." Cannot live? Yes. Generally speaking, you have a difficulty in understanding us, and it is difficult, first of all, because even if you do acknowledge us, you regard us as creatures from some other world. The devil rocked with laughter. Are we indeed creatures from some other world? If you only knew how silly that sounds. We are the very quintessence of this world, the earth, matter. Do you understand? We form the bond, as it were, between you and the earth, and we make sure that this bond is not broken. You are called spirits of evil. What nonsense! We are spirits of matter. What you call evil is, from our point of view, truth. It is often useful as a preliminary measure for binding you to the earth and preventing you from leaving it. All the same, to call us the spirits of evil is not correct. True, there are spirits of evil among us, those like myself, for example. However, they are the exception. After all, even I am not nearly as powerful in this sphere as I am reputed to be. I do not produce evil, I only, so to speak, collect it. I am not a professional, only an amateur, a collector. There you are. Very probably my inclinations are somewhat perverted. I am extremely fond of observing the way people perform their nasty deeds, especially if they use fine words at the same time. Unfortunately, it's very seldom that I can help them. You can see that from what I told you last time, that I'm completely powerless in the most interesting cases. More often than not, you people have very peculiar ways. Therefore, I repeat, I am an exception. A large majority of our fraternity is thoroughly attached to people. But you do not understand what we are doing for you. Were it not for us, you would have been lost without a trace long ago. What would have happened to us without you, I asked. You would have vanished, been completely annihilated and dissolved in the cosmic ether, said the devil. Just as you disappear when various foolish fantasies occur to you. He paused. Such as that known as transferring consciousness into the other world. You must remember from our former talks that I have not the faintest belief in other worlds. I consider them to be figments of the imagination. Consequently, I cannot give you information about them. I only know those regions with which I have immediate contact, and for those with which I have no contact, I do not admit existence. Do you understand? It means that people who go away from Earth or lose contact with it are annihilated. They cease to exist anywhere at any time. So we pity you. What a shame you are so stupid and so susceptible to fantasies which bring ruin upon you. We try to do our best to keep you on Earth. Had we not cared for you, you would have ceased to exist here long ago. As to where you would be, how should I know? To my way of thinking, nowhere, because to me there is nothing besides this world. We alone, and only we, keep you on this beautiful earth and give you the chance of admiring the sunset or the rising moon, listening to nightingales, loving, experiencing joy. Without us, nothing would have been left to you. But wait, I said. You just said yourself that you do not know where we would have been without you. Perhaps we might not have disappeared entirely, might not have annihilated ourselves, might not have ceased to exist anywhere, any time, as you said. Maybe, on the contrary, we might have started a new and far more pleasant life somewhere you did not exist. You know, of course, that such a theory exists. That's all a lot of nonsense, said the devil. First of all, where is this someplace? Where is it? On the right, on the left, in the east, in the west? It is a myth. And secondly, how are you going to enjoy something outside matter? All your pleasures are material. Your bodies are matter. And without material body, you cannot experience sensation of any kind. He who is without sensations has no existence. Finally, even if you did enjoy yourselves there without us, what satisfaction is this for us? What concern then would your pleasures be to us? I'm telling you, we love you. Well, think for yourself. Imagine a woman loves a man. You try to convince her that he would be far better off where she can never see him again. How do you think she will answer you? Do you think she will agree to let him go? Nothing in the world would persuade her if she is a real, live woman. She will say, even if it is not quite perfect for him here, he's got me here, and I will not let him go. Isn't that true? And she will be right. You people are a funny lot. You understand perfectly, but still you ask us to do the impossible. Listen, is it really possible to believe in all these ravings about some world beyond? We know very well what happens to a human being when he dies. And we know perfectly well that he has in him nothing other than what has been put into him by outside impressions. I am a positivist, or to be more precise, a monist. I acknowledge only one beginning of the universe, by which a visible, audible, and tangible world was created. Outside this world there is nothing. Of course there may be rays and vibrations as yet undiscovered, but that is something quite different. Sooner or later they will be discovered and will merely strengthen people's belief that everything is material. How you love fairy tales. And how we have to fight against them. In fact, it's quite easy to understand how these tales arise. People do not want to die. The thought of death frightens them. They were frightened that they will never see the sun again. In fact, frightened of the word never. So they invent various consolations for themselves. Paramount in their minds is the desire that something should remain after death. But we do not deceive ourselves. We have no need. We do not depend upon time, and we live as long as matter exists, and the kingdom of matter is eternal. The devil sprang to his feet, jumped high in the air, somersaulted, and landed on the elephant's head in a blaze of purple flame, shouting, "The kingdom of matter is eternal." Eternal, eternal, echoed the vaults of the inner halls, and the bats, rising in swarms, formed a strange black design above his head. "Stop these acrobatics," I said. "Maybe they impress some people, but I am much more interested in what you say. It seems that we have indeed been gravely mistaken about you." The devil jumped down and assumed the same pose as before, beside the feet of the elephant. "You are mistaken from beginning to end," he said, "as much about us as about yourselves. Your first error, as I have already said, consists in taking us for creatures of another world. No other world exists, none whatsoever. At all events, we do not believe in it. Our nature actually dictates that we do not know and cannot know anything except the earth. I am astonished that you fail to understand this. But as I have already begun to speak plainly with you, I will tell you that the legend about the other world has, to a considerable extent, been created by us." "I do not understand," I said. "You see," the devil said, "people often indulge in strange fantasies. Among other things, these often prevent people from living and from occupying themselves with their own affairs. And so, to free them from these fantasies, or at least to render them harmless, we take one tactical, or to be more precise, pedagogical course of action. Namely, parallel with the harmful and distracting fantasies, we create others, resembling them, but harmless. Take those fantasies about the unreality of this world, the world beyond, everlasting life, eternity. In all that there is something weakening, depriving people of the perseverance indispensable for life. You can see how the person who becomes to believe in everlasting life begins to regard the present one with some contempt. He begins to place little value on the good things of life. Is not so willing to fight for them. Very often does not even wish to retrieve what is taken away from him. Just think what can come of such a situation. Generally, he begins behaving strangely, spending too much time dreaming, experiencing mystical sensations, and finally resigning from life altogether. Mysticism, there's your chief evil. So we take pity on people, and using some susceptible mind, we construct our own theory about the world beyond life, beyond the grave, everlasting life, call it what you will. A simple, consequential, logical theory, false though it may be. Nevertheless, you understand, I don't want to suggest that a genuine theory of a world beyond does exist. All are equally false. Undoubtedly, there are theories of a certain unpleasant, mystical, or religious flavor. If these don't lead people straight into religious mania, they certainly corrupt them. Compared with these harmful fantasies, our theories are, between you and me, simply a small fabrication. There is nothing obscure, nothing mystical about them. We base everything on the most realistic earthly facts. It is just they have never been, are not, and never can be true. As a result, our world beyond is not in any way different from the earth. It is merely, so to speak, the earth turned upside down. You realize that places with much in common, even seen upside down, are not dangerous. We are helped in this situation by that basic error you make about us, ultimately by the error you make about yourselves. And how, I said, according to you, are we mistaken about ourselves? I even find it hard to explain it to you, said the devil. Your ideas are so confused. I must begin a long way back. In that old book of yours is written the story of Adam and Eve. Well, now that story is not correct, and this fallacious theory concerning the origin of man confuses all your subsequent ideas about him. As for the new theory of the origin of man from protoplasm, it is very witty, I admit that. But it is even further from the truth. I will now attempt to tell you what really happened. Adam and Eve are the names of those descended from the Great One, so they say. I do not know how true it is, but then I do not know that we can be sure of anything. Probably not. But they do say there was a Great One called the Bearer of Light, who fought and quarreled, not with heaven, but with the earth, with matter, or with falsehood, and conquered it. It was not until much later, we said, that he quarreled with heaven. He rose very high, but they say that in the end he doubted the truth, and for a moment he believed in that very falsehood he had been fighting against. This caused him to fall and to be smashed into 1,000 pieces. And it is from his descendants that Adam and Eve came. With the best will in the world, I cannot tell the story any better than that. You see, it borders on matters I don't understand. And what I don't understand does not exist. It is most unpleasant to speak about what is found on the edge of some emptiness beyond which nothing exists. We are afraid of this void, and there you have it. I've told you our biggest secret. It is on account of this fear, this terror, that we attach ourselves to you, to help us to ignore the dreadful nothingness and forget about it. But I will return to what I was talking about earlier. Adam and Eve, according to your old book, lived in paradise. This is the first error. They lived on earth. But how can I put it? They only played at living on earth, like children. And with 9/10 of their being, they lived in that emptiness we so detest, and which is hostile to life. They called this void the world of the miraculous. To my way of thinking, they were not normal, and they certainly suffered hallucinations of sight and hearing. Take the fact that they reported to have seen God and spoken with him. I don't know what that means, but it is undoubtedly something terrible. I saw the devil begin to tremble and huddle himself into his cloak. Of course I do not believe in God, that would be ridiculous, he said, but I pass on to you the legend as it stands. It is said that we rebelled against God. That is quite absurd. We never rebelled against God because we did not believe, do not believe, and can never believe in Him. The part of the legend dealing with our rebellion against God we invented ourselves. Later on I will tell you the reason. What is said about Adam and Eve further on in your book is again incorrect. It is written that they wanted to be like gods and wanted to know what is good and what is evil. That is wrong because they were like gods and knew what is good and what is evil. To us, this was most unpleasant and frightening. The devil became silent as if he found it difficult to speak. They were as if stronger than we, he continued. Of course, all this was fantasy, but we were for them on the level of animals. They could see us only as animals. And they also gave us names corresponding to our qualities. The devil pronounced the last words very unwillingly. I must also tell you, he continued, that they were not alone on earth. The earth was inhabited by another race of people, the descendants of animals. But nothing is said in your book about this other race. They were completely in our power and could never get away from us. But we wanted above all to subordinate Adam and Eve. Their presence embarrassed us. We could not be sure of anything with them there. You see, they gave the impression that at any moment they could make the whole world disappear. They said that nothing existed and everything was merely a dream, and that it was possible to wake up and find everything gone. The devil lost his casual tone and seemed afraid to speak. Looking at him at that moment, I realized that the basis of his nature was fear. These are words that are hard to utter, he said, looking at me like a beaten dog. Still, now I have started, I had better continue. Thus the struggle started. The problem was to rid these two of their fantasies, to convince them that the world does exist, that life is not a game but a very serious, even difficult and troublesome thing, and that notions of good and evil are ultimately only relative and impermanent. To convince them would mean to banish them from paradise. This paradise really disgusted us. Perpetual talks about God, eternal love and kisses. We could not take it at all. Why did it irritate you so? I said. Of course you wouldn't understand. They said that love was their main strength and a powerful magic, that through love they could resurrect the Great One and thus restore the lost world. I don't understand it at all, but just think of it. How could we tolerate such a perverted philosophy? It was quite enough for us to accept the fact that they could vanish before our very eyes. You see, very often a rose-colored cloud would come down, and they vanished. We were powerless to prevent it, even though it disturbed us greatly. Besides, we found their costume positively dreadful. You know, the one Adam and Eve had before the fall? We considered it highly improper. Matter demands a certain propriety. These two denied matter and yet admired beauty. The devil drawled the world contemptuously. We tried to convince them that the body is essentially very ugly and decent and much better covered up whenever possible. But they were not prepared to listen. It reached a point where their example began to have a bad effect on the other race, the descendants of the animals. There remained only one way to get the better of Adam and Eve, to introduce suffering into their life and force them to believe in the reality of matter. But how? We thought for a long time. Finally, one of us turned our attention to the descendants of the animals. The whole of their lives consisted of harboring grudges, and endeavoring to get out of difficulties by burdening others with them. They had no doubts about the reality of this world, nor of material things. On the contrary, they were quite ready to smash each other's heads in for the tiniest thing. A pretty stone, for example. Their ideas of good and evil changed so quickly that even we could not keep up with them. In the morning, the sun is good, at midday evil, by evening, good again. In the evening, the wife is good, in the morning, evil, in the evening, good again, and so on. And we started wondering why everything went so well with them. Perhaps it was something to do with their habits. It occurred to us that if only we could get Adam and Eve to take up one of these little ways, we might very well manage to convince them of the reality of things and of the relativity of good and evil. Among the customs of the animal descendants was one which particularly entertained us. Of all their ways, this appeared to us to be the most idiotic. This was their habit of eating daily and in great quantities the fruit from a certain tree. They had a legend that in the distant past some god who had come down to earth had taught them to eat this fruit. They raised statues of this god and worshipped him. This was amusing enough, but still more comical was the fact that when they did not have this fruit, they actually suffered, and many even died. And so it was that those tribesmen who had a lot of fruit stored or possessed many trees were respected and considered wise and good. But those who had neither fruit trees or fruit were thought to be good for nothing and were sometimes even killed. We came to the conclusion that if we could get Adam and Eve to eat this fruit, we might succeed in making common sense intelligible to them. So one of our number went to Eve and offered her one of these fruits to taste. As I said, we could only appear before them in the shape of animals, so my colleague had to take on the appearance of a snake. In your book it is written that they were forbidden to eat the fruit of a certain tree. That is not true. Nothing was forbidden them. There was, however, much they did not understand. They found great pleasure simply in looking at this fruit of which the descendants of the animals ate so greedily. When the snake brought Eve some of the fruit and explained that it was edible, Eve ate it and gave some to Adam. He too ate it, and they both began to enjoy this new attraction. From that day on, the snake brought the fruits regularly. They ate it in the morning, at midday, and in the evening. Then the snake told them where to find the fruit growing in abundance and taught them to gather it for themselves. This new pastime they enjoyed also. I cannot tell you that they had never eaten before this, but it is certain that earlier on everything had been different. They had ascribed a special meaning to everything, and they had felt magic in all things. Now, at last, there was no magic at all in anything. They ate just as the descendants of the animals did, for pleasure, or in order to pass the time, and we watched them and waited to see where it would lead.